So this is a little bit more a tricky subject to talk about, really, which is that I alluded to before, about the fact that not all of us that look like human actually are that human. And this is because we all come through different DNA lines, really, before we're born into our physical body. We're all born into the human form body, but some of us have a very different energy configuration. And so they may find it easier or harder, generally harder, to fit into the human box, which we talked about on the previous video about our true self being energy rather than human. And so they are more in line with the nature of a wolf, for example. So it's more like a slightly different species, really. And it will have a different vibration, a different energy vibration, and they will have a different feeling vibration. They don't have the same depth of feeling that a human would have. So they may be referred to as cold, austere, unfeeling. This may be a man or a woman. It can usually be a lot harder for a woman with this kind of vibration, being thrust into the human box by themselves and by society, of course, and probably by their family. Not having that nurturing, which is a kind of a given expectation of being a female, really. Just as that is a given expectation of being a male, that you must be strong, must always be strong, not show your feelings, etc., etc. So in their actual vibrations, the extent of their energy in terms of their lower energies around their feelings are much sort of lighter. Pros and cons about that, of course. It's difficult for them to express their feelings then. They don't have necessarily the depth and breadth that the human would have. So hence they may be referred to as cold or colder. They may not have that moral standing that a human have, because of course a lot of humans are affected by feelings. So that's why they think, well, I wouldn't do that because that would hurt somebody. And that wolf type of nature wouldn't have quite that empathy to know that that was a line that they'd crossed. So they wouldn't have the morality of the human being, you see. It's just a different vibration. It can be very, very difficult for them to go into this human box, because of course they've got to expand feelings. They've got to find feelings. They've got to find feeling morality as well. They've got to manufacture. They've got to do things correctly, to almost for themselves, really, so that they can show themselves, well, I am human. I really, really am human. I do this, that, the other, this, that, the other, this. I do all of those, and then they'll forget to do something that's so obvious to a human, because they don't have that sense of empathy and feeling that the more full-blown human would have. That full breadth and depth of emotional range. It's almost like they've come through on the DNA of a lion, a predator type, or a tiger, or slightly more, so they can go further distances, because it's pros and cons with this not so deep emotions. They can travel perhaps further and higher. Perhaps they can be incredible inventors, and they cannot get almost dragged down by the emotions that may stop other people doing things. So we're given all sorts of vibrations within the human form. not just one type of vibration. We all look human, yes, but there are different vibrations that come in and try and squeeze into that box. And the wolf vibration is a very different vibration. As a case in point, different kind of species. Just taking my microphones there, yeah. Different kind of species really coming through. So they've got to work so hard, which takes a massive amount of energy, actually. They have to, because most of all, they have to hide it from themselves, that they're not as human as they'd like to be. It's almost like, yes, they do have to convince other people, but most of all, they have to convince themselves, which is going to take a lot of energy. So really, they may spend their whole life conforming, because that's so vital for them to conform, to this human behavioural protocols, really. Do this way, that's correct, that's this way, that's that. They won't have that depth of emotion going on. So they're always going to make these kind of fatal errors, really. But they'll cover them up so beautifully. Mostly from themselves, but, who would have thought, this sounds so far-fetched, And they've spoken to me about this for so many years, and it's a difficult one to talk about because I know how bizarre this sounds, but it's just coming through. Once we accept that we're energy, there are different formations of that energy, things that have come through and they've not necessarily nurtured huge extents and depths and breadths of feelings. Not perhaps like a very sensitive, in contrast, a very sensitive person has probably developed in the emotional realm, has probably expanded in that area a huge amount. Whereas the wolf type energy has not expanded in the emotional realm, chakra, if you like, the lower regions, so much. They've got that perhaps more freedom to move. And of course, all of these different types of natures are needed to build our society, to construct different parts of our society, And, those who are more sensitive can be incredibly expressive in the arts, for example, There's a lot of depth that they're harnessing and seeing and hearing. It's like you think about dogs, and their perception and their nose, their nasal perception. Some of them have, 10,000 stronger, better sense of smell than we humans have, So we come through with different energy configurations, really. We do. We come through and we're all trying to squeeze into the human box. So the wolf type person will be very much into looking as human as they possibly can. And they will manufacture their whole life. This is hugely energy draining, of course, because it's, who would think that they would even begin to accept the notion until they maybe heard it. I mean, I'm hoping that a person will see this video and go, yeah, that's helpful, because it's like a lifetime of squeezing into a wrong shape, Now, it can tip over. They can tip over in being predatory, because here's the thing, is that if they come into the world with this vibration, it's like the human would reject them. And it's likely that really their behaviour, the way they do things has probably been hugely rejected their whole life. You might find even their siblings are accepted, but they are not. You know, male or female, you know, they're just not right, are they? You know, they're just not. And this does create, because it's quite a masculine side. It's quite a masculine side to be the wolf for a male or a female. It's a development of that masculine side. And so the masculine side tends to be more inclined to attack. The feminine side of us will be more inclined to internalize issues or wounds. The masculine side will be more inclined to attack if it's got wounds. So this massive rejection, they'd be more inclined to want to punish the very people who rejected them, which would be the humans, the real, more genuine feeling humans. So this sort of punishment, revenge, they can really indulge in and find it satisfying to assuage their pain, you know, that they feel. But of course, they are the ones who are doing the play acting. First of all, they are the ones who are not accepting their true nature, the energy shape of themselves. First of all, they are doing the rejecting of themselves, but they are punishing the human to a lesser or greater extent. It's a spectrum, you know. It may be very abusive. It may be very subtle, maybe sort of humiliation of a partner, or, you know, enjoying things that just don't work out. A sort of a subtle punishment thing, or it may be very abusive, depending on their childhood and their upbringing and their life experiences and their wounds. So it can be really big. So they're going to be more inclined to, but again, accepting themselves as this kind of energy first and foremost, and then self-love, loving their energy, is the runway path again. It's the runway path for them. And they'll find their wounds pop up, and they look at them and they deal with them, and they realize it's themselves rejecting themselves first. But it's a tough call, living amongst human beings and having to pretend you're one of them. It's tough, and it's doubly tough for the female wolf type, because, you know, she's, as I said, her human box is a very tight one. You know, she's got to be nurturing, and of course she doesn't have that emotional depth. It's like the judgment on her is very, very intense. You know, very rejecting, very disapproving, and they'll want to feel superior to the human. You know, so they probably indulge in maybe putting down, making others inferior to them, so that they don't go round feeling like this misfit all the time. But again, understanding that energy first can release them from that pain. You know, but otherwise they're in this misfit box all the time. As I said, it can be very, very difficult for the female in particular. You know, a male wolf can almost look like a CEO, you know. He's like striding ahead in the world, looking, feeling, being strong. That goes down quite well as a male, doesn't it? But obviously, if you're female and you're not inclined for any nurturing at all, you know, it's a lot. It can be very tough, and they can be very inclined to self-harm, hurting themselves, being cruel to themselves, being mean to themselves, punishing themselves. You know, punishing themselves. But it is a huge loss of energy for them to be. They're always disappointing. They're always displeasing. They're always in a position where they disappoint, because they're not realizing it comes fundamentally because they're not really the human. They're not really that human. You know. Step back from that. Accept that your energy. It's so freeing. It's so freeing. You know. They don't disappoint. They don't disappoint. They're not meant to be in that kind of very, very human feeling box. They're not meant to be there. They don't have to force feelings like blood from their body. They don't have to force themselves into being the right way, you know. And then, of course, that removes all that vengefulness and self-hate. And if they change their patterns to love, to self-love, you know, really it removes that sort of predatory stance, really. Because if they're doing love, you know, really, if people are disapproving of them or hating on them or thinking they're wrong or whatever, then they're doing self-love. They're filling that void for themselves. They're filling themselves with that good feeling. So, you know, it's not such a big deal. You know, even if a parent rejects the person, it's not such a big deal anymore, because they've surrounded themselves with whatever makes them feel self-loved. All of those things in place that make them feel self-loved. It's very important for the wolves to see this.